So again, I'm Katie Danielson and ECE 221 with project number 5, and we're picking up from where we left off last time with the child coal miners. How the day began, I think, really sets the tone for the whole thing. Children were lowered into the mine down a pit shaft with a winch at 4 a.m. Yes, that's really how it happened. So what was coal mining like for child labor anyway? Well, there were 12 to 16 hours a day of work. Dangers included respiratory disease, spine deformation, explosions, fires, falling into the path of carts, and getting stuck in mines. Children started as young as 4 or 5. They crawled through tunnels as small as 16 inches. There were no ventilation or safety measures of any kind. Children worked as trappers, where they opened and closed doors and spent the entire workday isolated in tunnels waiting for coal cars. Hurriers, where they pulled small coal cars through narrow tunnels, or breaker sorters broke coal into usable pieces. The average lifespan was 25 years. There are some quotes for young coal miners because there were several advisory committees that spoke in front of Parliament in the struggle to get labor laws passed. So I'm going to let you all look at these in the PowerPoint if you want to. And they're not very uplifting, I'll warn you, but they're very important things to read about what these children had to say about their work. Imagine working in this for 16 hours a day. Then we have chimney sweeps. They started as young as 3 years old. Dangers included falling, fires, getting stuck in the chimney, severe respiratory disease. Orphans or kidnapped children were often used. They were often underfed to keep them small enough to do the work, and they'd pretty much be turned out at the age of 9 or 10 when they grew too big to fit into the small spaces. Now, when we talk about child factory workers, we're actually looking at the pictures from Lewis Hines from the early 20th century in the US, because we don't have photographs during the Industrial Revolution. Photography just hadn't gotten there technologically yet. So it's important to remember that with these photographs, we're really seeing an idealized version of what existed 70 to 100 years before. So they also worked 12 to 16 hours a day, paid 10 to 20% of adult wages, no legally required safety measures at all, often used for the most dangerous work, such as crawling under machines to clean, oil, join threads, and so forth. One thing that was very common, especially in the earlier days, was that cartloads of poor children would be rounded up and brought to factory towns to pretty much work as indentured servants in factories. The children might live in dormitories attached to factories, or if they weren't orphans in poor family homes, beatings were very common to keep children at work. It's important to say that not all factory owners were bad. Some provided good living quarters and working conditions for children, also medical care and some education. The problem was that no laws required them to do this. So why did they do it? The spinning men or women, whichever they are, have the privilege, I understand generally, to employ children of their own selecting. And if they can get a child to do their business for 1 shilling or 1 shilling and 6 pence, they will take that child before they will give 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 shillings to an older one. Mr. George Gould, merchant in fustian goods, Manchester. Then, in order to keep the children awake and to stimulate their exertions, means are made use of, to which I shall now advert. Sir, children are beaten with thongs prepared for the purpose. These are the instruments. Here the honorable member exhibited some black, heavy leathern thongs, one of them fixed in a sort of handle, the smack of which, when struck upon the table, resounded through the house. They are quite equal to breaking an arm. We speak with execration of the cart whip of the West Indies, but let us see this night an equal feeling rise against the factory thong of England. Richard Sadler, speaking at the House of Commons in 1832, before the passing of the first Factory Act in 1833. Infant lace makers. Children began to work at lace making in poor homes at age 2 or 3, working up to 16 hours a day. And again, there is much more that you can read about this in the PowerPoint, but yes, this really happened. Now, if we move on to children in cities, we're actually talking about a later time, more in the Victorian era, and it was kind of a spillover from the Industrial Revolution and a logical consequence of what happened in the cities as a result. Those are poor children in Liverpool in 1880, for instance. So, what did children do in cities? Crossing sweepers, chimney sweeps. They sold small items on the street like matches. They worked in sweatshops. They begged for food and money. They might be in the workhouse. They were very often used by adult gangs as criminals. Most prostitutes were between the ages of 15 and 22, but child prostitution was not uncommon at all. If we look at some of Charles Dickens' characters like Little Joe in Great Expectations or Oliver Twist, they might seem melodramatic and over the top today, but at the time they were very realistic, and they were based on many real cases of poor children. Well, eventually we do get to reform. The first ones were just not well enforced, and there is a long list here, but basically the first Factory Act passed in 1802, not enforced. The 1833 Factory Act banned children from working in textile factories under the age of 9. From 9 to 13, they were limited to 9 hours a day and 48 hours a week. This was very unevenly enforced, though. And as time went by, there began to be a change in the idea of childhood. In the Victorian era, the idea of being a child as a separate sphere started to emerge. It started to be defined as a time of innocence when children should be protected from harm and given education. This certainly didn't always translate to reality, but the attitudes were beginning to shift. This was still very different from how we would understand children in the family today. The ideal was you could afford servants to take care of all the everyday chores with children, but it was the start of a huge shift. And we see this reflected in finally having effective reforms. The Factory Commission of 1842 reported on children in coal mines. This led to finally the 10 Hours Bill of 1847, which limited working hours to 10 for children and also for women. And this was the first labor law that was really enforced. More laws in 1850, 1853, and finally child labor officially abolished in Britain in 1867. In the US, child labor ended legally in 1938. Here are some modern child labor laws, which you can also look at. The Minimum Age Convention, ratified by 172 countries, finally happened in 1973. The Rights of the Child through the UN was 1989. And as you can see, in 2021, the UN General Assembly declares this to be the year for the elimination of child labor. The goal is this will happen by 2025. I don't know, but it's good to have a goal. And in fact, all of this history, I think, really leads us to where we are today, because even right now, we don't have child labor in the same way we used to in nations like Britain or the US or countries in the European Union. But as many as 152 million children aged 5 to 17 around the world are engaged in child labor, working in jobs that deprive them of their childhood, interfere with schooling, or harm their mental, physical, or social development. Nearly half of them work under hazardous conditions, such as carrying heavy loads on construction sites or digging in open pit mines. By definition, child labor is a violation of both child protection and child rights. So I think we finally get to the answer. Childhood isn't natural, whatever that even means. It isn't just a complete construct, but it's a set of rights. The battle for those rights, as we've seen, is very hard fought over a long period of time and very hard won. It took a long time to get effective reform. Like so many rights, they can be taken away. If we don't remember history, we're condemned to repeat it. So we have to work for the rights of children, to be free from exploitation, to have the space and time to learn and grow, and to have a safe and happy childhood. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and please leave any comments below.